Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for my AMAP Friday. So today I'm going to be talking about what does it take to make a good session. And is that, the question was somebody was, asking about, is it the teacher or the apparatus? I think it's really both. Hi, Alexandra. I think, when you're talking about a session, it's a combination, but the teacher makes a big difference, but so does the apparatus, and so does the training of the teacher. And what I mean by that is, when you first start as a teacher, how good are you? And some people it comes naturally to, and other people it does not, like everything in life. When we look at professions and we look at how people learn and do, and, we're not all created equal when it comes to that, what God gave us in the sense of our skills. It's basically because you have a knack, and some people can do this better, some people could do that. Some work with their hands better, some work with their minds better, some combinations. I always look at it as, a dancer, the famous dancers like Baryshnikov or Nureyev, and they were people who not only had the knack but also had the desire, right? Because a lot of people who have a knack for something, and if it comes easy, it's not challenging, and so they're not really always interested. I've seen that over my decades, and I've seen that in Pilates as well. And so I think it's really the teaching, because you have to be taught first, and the teacher is only as good as the training, and I've said that for almost 40 years now, close to it, and that's part of the process, right? What's your training about? And is it an hour, a couple hours, a year, all those things before you go out and start really teaching people. So, and again, even within that, you're going to have different people who excel more than others. And what's the background? What are they, how do they train? Because in the beginning, in doing the teacher training, one of the things that I noticed fairly quickly was that the dancers usually picked it up a little bit faster and quicker. But that's because dancers have done what? They've spent however long they've been training to be a dancer, and a lot of times that's 10, 20, 30 years, or maybe even longer. And then they retire, and then they're going to, what's their new job? And, they pick a job that does what? That is movement. So they have already trained extensively in strength and flexibility, so the doing the work usually comes easier than somebody who's never exercised, but gets into, starts taking a Pilates session and decides they want to be a teacher. Those are two different things. Plus, dancers, they've spent their career in dance doing what? Observing movement and reproducing that movement that they have observed. So what are you doing when you're training to be a Pilates teacher? You are observing movement, and you're learning how to then reproduce that movement and then start to teach that movement. And again, teaching is a skill itself, and it has many different levels. So I think that in the beginning, the training definitely matters. So that's a big issue for the teacher. And then over time, everybody can, catch up to everybody else if they want to put the work in. It reminds me of in dance, I came out of dance, so if you didn't have the right body or the right size or the right whatever, you were told, oh, you'll never be a professional dancer. And it reminded me of Roseanne Germer, who was a principal at Pennsylvania Ballet. And she was 4'11". And she was told when she was training, you're never going to be the star. Well, she became the principal dancer at Pennsylvania Ballet. And I can tell you that the men loved it, because here was this, when you're partnering in dance, if you have a big woman, it's harder to lift and carry. And if you have a small one, it's easier. So, the men didn't necessarily mind that as much, and it was easier on them. It's not saying that you can't, if you're bigger, they would lift the big girls. They would lift, I shouldn't say girls, women, and do both. And again, if you're in Trocadero, same thing. The big guy or the smaller guy or the smaller person or a bigger person, that type of thing. So, whatever it is that you're doing, it becomes easier that way. Okay, so you don't fit the mold, but you can still break that mold, right? And show that, with effort, time, and skill, you can overcome a lot of obstacles. And in teaching, it's the same thing in Pilates. So over time, I think that you can have somebody that in the beginning wasn't necessarily the best teacher, because even if they had good training, but because of their background and their skills coming into it compared to somebody else. But over time, that levels off because they train and they do the work. Now, let's talk about equipment. Okay, so does equipment matter? Oh, for sure. I mean, you're doing work on a system that was designed to work on a certain type of apparatus, and it was invented for that particular purpose, and those exercises were used to do that, right? They were developed and used and worked on, and pretty much majority of them stayed the same once Mr. Pilates figured it out, what it did for the body and how it did it, and the breathing and the repetitions and those types of things, because over 40 years, I think it's 7, let's talk about the reformer as an apparatus, all right? 7 different photo shoots, and the exercises didn't change. There's some changes, but not a lot. And so if you're always inventing new exercises and coming up with something that's supposedly better, what are you going to do when you do a photo shoot? You're going to keep adding those new exercises, and that's not what happened. He just did it at different times in different apparatus and changes and things like that. So I think that's an important thing to understand, okay? But so does the apparatus matter? Yeah, and now I see such changes that, are you getting the same results? And I don't think so. And so then it changes. So is it better or worse? I don't really know. And I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole nother tangent as far as is something better or worse because it's changed, right? I focus on what Mr. Pilates taught and used because there's a lifetime of experience in that system and work. And it pretty much does what he says it was going to do if you follow his principle, which is do it the way I say to do it, which means you have to do it on the apparatus he invented to do it on. Now, is every apparatus the same? No. There's no 2 reformers that are exactly the same. Ask anybody that goes into a reformer class, and it reminds me of dancers with their ballet bar. This is my spot. This is my reformer. So, that's what they like, and they don't like the other ones. If they have to, they'll do it, but that's not their preferred thing. And they're basically the same. They were manufactured one right after the other and shipped out, and so they could be the same, and people feel it's different. So I think that's a personal thing as well. So a couple things there, right? There's a couple issues. So when you're looking at apparatus, does it if it changes too much, does it matter? And of course it does. But the magic and the legacy of Joe's apparatus, which I have quite a few of his pieces, and we know that Elaine has them as well, and some other people. We're not the only ones. There's others, but between Elaine and I, we do have the largest collection of the original apparatus from Mr. Pilates. And again, there's a difference between, did Joe work on those apparatus and teach on those apparatus, or were they, in a studio somewhere else where he wasn't really participating? I mean, he opened it up and set things up, but did he really work on those apparatus? And that's, when we're talking about spirit, that to me is the spirit behind that, So there is that aspect of it as well, right? There's space, there's equipment, there's patina, there's history, and, history does matter. And it's very important to understand that, and being able to see and experience. It's like when people come and they get on the clawfoot reformer that was Joe's in his studio for decades, that he then took up to Massachusetts in the 50s with a bunch of other equipment that, because one of the things that we see in the late 50s, early 60s, early 60 or 61, the apparatus in the studio changed. So we see that one of the things he did, he got rid of the clawfoot reformers, right? Because by the time the what was it, the Sports Illustrated article with Chuck's pictures, right? What do we see? We see, oh, and by the way, if you're in the LA area, Chuck reached out and on social media and asked if anybody would be willing to come and work with him. He's had some devastating issues and problems. So, if you feel inclined, get in touch with Chuck and help him out. But if you look at his pictures, what we see there is that in 61, October of 61, all the equipment has now become metal. So what happened to all the old wood stuff? Well, we know that he took that and moved it, sold it, gave it away. We don't have a receipt for selling, but, I've heard that through first person and second person. And then, the studio up in Beckett, he took the equipment up there. I have chairs and I have barrels. I have reformer. The Cadillac, I think he built there. Okay. And there's the massage table, but it used to be a bench mat. So it may have been one of the original bench mats that was in the studio in New York City as well. And so what he did is then he had all the equipment made new in the 60s, right? So, and we see that. And then, he passed away in 67, stayed with the studio, and it's, carried on. And we see those things, right? So there's history there. So we do have a way to be able to reproduce the equipment the way he wanted it done. And and again, are there changes? Of course there are. His original Wonder chair to what he had in the 60s is different, slightly different shape and, different things. And he had and he did have other variations of the Wonder chair, but he didn't keep reproducing those. And that's not what he used in the studio. I mean, he definitely tried different things. And there's a chair with more than one spring, 4 sets of springs, different variations, lots of different stuff. But what did he end up with and stick with and use, consistently over time? And that's what I'm talking about. So when we look at what makes a good system, well, it's the training first. And, the teacher is only as good as the training, because if, you don't, and again, training in what? Because in anything goes Pilates today, anything can be called Pilates. So what's that training? If you're talking about Joe's training as close as possible, well, the closest there was Romana, and that became classical, and she also changed some things for different reasons. But as far as trying to be as close to Joe as possible, I think if you look at any of the elders, she's definitely the one that focused on that the most, because, I know there's elders like you can make things up and do whatever you want to do. Well, that's contemporary. So, and again, is it bad? I don't know. I haven't seen it. As a physical therapist, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. I can't tell you. But what I can tell you as a physical therapist that's worked with bodies for 40 years and worked with Pilates for 40 years, that what Mr. Pilates taught and what Romana taught, if you do it and you follow it, it does what it says it was going to do. And if you do it on the apparatus, it does that as well. And Romana was very stickler. It's interesting when, I have a lot of depositions from different people from, the trademark case. And Mr. Gratz was one of them. And he talks about how, he tried to change things and Romana would shut him down and say, no, you can't do it. And then he would come in and she would explain to him. And then he was like, oh, now I understand why. So, because he was, he was a metal shop fabricator, and they were making new things for people all the time. So he would come up with ideas to try to make it easier or what he thought would be better. And sometimes it was okay. And sometimes it wasn't, jump board. That was okay. The edging, he had the rubber edging, and then they made the extrusion so that it was a rounded edge instead of a sharp edge. And she didn't mind that either because, it avoided the problems that some of the issues you had and made it a safer studio. So a lot of things that Romana changed quite often was related to safety more than anything else. So, but again, when you look at the structure and the function in relationship to the springs and the apparatus, that really didn't change. And so if you're looking for, does it all matter? Sure. The exercise, the training, the exercises, how it's taught, And how long have you been, how long has your teacher been teaching for? It reminds me, I went to go study with Iyengar in India back in the 80s, right after PT school. I was getting into Pilates and yoga at the same time, trying to find out ways to take care of dancers and dance injuries. So I went and studied. I like to go to the source. So I went to Iyengar in India for, Iyengar yoga. And somebody was like, was he any good? And I was thinking to myself, so I went to go study with somebody who's been doing this for a lifetime. And they asked me if he's any good, and he's got a school and a program and all that stuff. And, to me, it was like there's questions that you can ask that you should already know the answer to. But okay. Anyways, so that being said, same thing, with Romana. Romana was an amazing teacher. Most amazing Pilates teacher I've met so far, right? And now I haven't gone out and studied with all the teachers that are out there, but when it comes to learning how to teach, she was very well versed and practiced and had a history of not only in her own body but on the apparatus and with Joe and Clara, and was left to carry on that work. So she did her best. In a very trying and difficult times at periods, right? So we see all that. So putting that together, how do you transfer that information in the training and the teaching? And that's sort of one of the things that we tried to do in the training program. So, and that's what, and there's prerequisites, there's an application. I know some people say, oh, anybody can come in, it doesn't matter. That's true, and that's an option. Okay. What we found is that quite often the process of evaluating people and getting their input was important. It reminds me when I looked into doing Rolfing at one time, and there was this whole process that you had to do, and you had to show where you're going to get the money and how you're going to work, all these things, because you have an idea and you try it once and you're like, oh, I want to do that. But you don't really realize what it takes to really do that. It's like in PT school. When I want to do PT, you have to do at least, back then it was 50, I think it's more now, volunteer community service hours at a PT facility. Didn't matter, and you couldn't be just at one, you had to have a couple, because they wanted to make sure you understood what it was going to be that you were going to try to become, right? Because you can have an experience as like, oh, I sprained my ankle in the PT and I liked them, and they gave me exercise and it was great. Well, that's not the only thing you're ever going to do. There's lots of other variations, and the same with Pilates. You're going to have all sorts of variables. So you need to understand that. So that's why there's prerequisites. That's why there's, an apprenticeship. That, there's all these things that, what's going to make the best teacher. And that's, to me, what's the most important. How do you become the best that you can be? How do you become better than the teacher that taught you? That's the goal. How does that happen? And so that's what you want to look for. So first of all, when it comes to what's a good session, what's your teacher's history? How long? Where'd they train? Because it is important. And do they continue to train? Do they continue to learn? Do they continue to try to understand the work that they're teaching you? And again, this is not about classical or contemporary. I'm a classical person. I'm focused on that. I always have been. But people need to exercise. And if you're out there teaching people and they're getting better and you're helping them, it's great. Go keep doing it. If you want to then learn more about, what Joe really taught and how he taught it, and will that help you? I think it will. Then, there's a place, there is a source, there's a place to go. You want to try the apparatus? You want to feel what it really felt like? Do you want to try what it was like to be on the apparatus that thousands or hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of clients that Joe taught worked on? So you can have a sense of what it felt like back then as well as now. And see if your equipment is similar. And again, if you look at Gratz and you look at what Joe did, it's very similar. Now there's knockoffs, and knockoffs are usually never as good because they're a knockoff. But at the same time, I haven't, now if you invent something new and different, great, good for you. And that's a whole nother thing, right? So let's see where that goes. I mean, because with all that's going on, somebody may come up with that and come up with a whole nother system. But that's not what I see on social media. I just see this craziness, everything all over the place. Okay, I've rambled on enough. All right, because I have to get ready to go to work. Thanks for joining my AMAP. So again, what is it? It's your teaching. The teaching is important. The training's important. The apparatus is important. It's all important. And you can't. It's kind of like trying to pull out a single muscle or a muscle group when it comes to learning movement and function. That's not how nervous systems work, and that's not how Pilates works. Joe's system. It's the gestalt of it all. And if you don't understand that, and you say it's this or this is more important, that's more important. I'm not so sure about that. And again, you now have my view. You have an understanding. You can take it and do whatever you want with it. Okay, so on Tuesdays, every Tuesday at 12:30, you can join me in my Balanceology class, which is about balance work. And then at 1 o'clock, I do my arm springs, leg springs based on the resistor poster, but I add more to it. We do more. And let me see what's coming up. In September, down in Fairfax, we're going to be doing a workshop, Elaine and I, on the mat and some other things at Vicky's studio. So you can look at, if you go on to our social media accounts, you'll see all the information for that. And you can also sign up on, there's a link for that in my Linktree account. Linktree /Sean_Gallagher. So you can go there and get that information as well. And again, 2026, Pilates at the Pillow. If you're a comprehensively trained teacher, apply. We are more than half full, so apply and to come join us. We're going to do some really extraordinary special things. So stay tuned. All right, everybody, thanks for joining. Bye.